Hi everybody, and welcome to this revision video on personality disorders as part of the psychology of the individual topic for stage 2 psychology. Let's get started. So let's go through the definition of personality disorders in general. So personality disorders exist when personality traits become so obvious, inflexible, or harmful that they negatively impact on an individual's work, schooling, family, and social relationships. So the key word in that definition is negative, all right? So if there's a negative impact in one or more of these areas, so work, schooling, family, and social relationships, it may be evidence that someone has a personality disorder. We're going to talk more about what that actually means according to the DSM-5 later on in this video. But let's go through the basics first. So awareness of disorders typically happen in late adolescence, but they can develop earlier or later than that. But usually the main demographic age of a personality disorder emerging is in late adolescence. And approximately 10% of the population and up to half of psychiatric patients in hospitals have a personality disorder or are suspected of having a personality disorder. So that's quite a lot. Now, it's also worth mentioning at this point that socioeconomic and race do not provide any greater risk. However, some common findings on gender indicate that men outnumber women on antisocial personality disorder diagnoses 6-1, yet women outnumber men 3-1 with borderline personality disorder diagnoses. So there may be some consistencies with gender. However, other factors such as socioeconomic status and race do not provide any greater risk. There's no consistency within the data, but gender for these particular diagnoses and these particular disorders, there is evidence of that. So it's important to consider with everything, but of course personality disorders as well, the biopsychosocial model when examining personality disorders. So several factors may actually contribute to or cause a personality disorder to develop, as we've summarized here. So starting with the biological, obviously genetic predisposition. So if it runs in the family, obviously it's going to be more likely that someone develops a personality disorder themselves. Any neurological dysfunction, lower levels of serotonin, which is our feel-good endorphin happy hormone, and an abnormal prefrontal cortex. We know that that is definitely the case with several personality disorders, including antisocial personality disorder. There's also psychological factors to consider as well. So having negative memories of trauma, lowered self-esteem, obviously links into perception, a very negative pessimistic outlook, all right, very black and white thinking, learning from others, learning negative behaviors from other people, and that goes through observational learning as well. Lack of development in social skills and rewarded for bad behavior rather than positive reinforcement for good behavior. Other social aspects of the biopsychosocial model in regards to personality disorders, obviously family dysfunction, childhood maltreatment, and a lack of attachment. So going back to slightly Year 11 psychology, the Bowlby theory of lack of maternal care can also be an indicator and a risk factor for developing a personality disorder. So let's look at what we call risk factors. So a risk factor is anything that may increase the likelihood of developing a mental illness, not just personality disorders, but just in general, a mental illness. We also go through this in detail when we do our next topic, which is psychology of health and well-being. So certain child factors, so genetic influences, a lower IQ and learning difficulties, specific development delay, communication difficulties, physical illness, and low self-esteem. Family factors, so family disharmony or breakup, inconsistent discipline styles, parents with mental illnesses and or substance abuse problems, physical, sexual, and or emotional abuse and neglect, parental criminality or alcoholism, and death and loss. School factors may include bullying, discrimination, breakdown of or lack of positive friendships, peer pressure, and poor pupil-to-teacher relationships. And community factors may include socioeconomic disadvantage, homelessness, disaster, war, accidents, or other overwhelming events, discrimination such as racism, sexism, etc., other significant life events, and lack of access to support services. So in class, we're going to be organizing these into the biopsychosocial model, but just for the purpose of this video, these are the main risk factors that may increase the likelihood of developing a mental illness or personality disorder. Also want to make it clear, and I will make this clear in class if I haven't already, that a person may have all of these risk factors but still not develop a mental health disorder. So it's not a black and white or hard fast rule that if everyone has, or an individual has all of these risk factors, that they're definitely going to develop a mental health disorder. It just increases the likelihood. Now, a protective factor is the opposite. So protective factors are anything that may decrease the likelihood of developing a mental illness. And again, here are the most commonly identified, which for the vast majority of them are the opposite of the risk factors that we just talked about. So child protective factors include secure attachment experience, especially to parents, good communication skills, having a belief in control of their actions, a positive attitude, experiences of success and achievement, and the capability to reflect on their actions. Family protective factors, so family harmony and stability, supportive parenting, strong family values, healthy amounts of affection, clear, constant discipline style, and support for education. School protective factors, so a positive school climate that enhances belonging and connectedness, clear policies on behaviour and bullying, open door policies for children who raise problems, and a whole school approach to promoting good mental health. And community factors that are protective include wider support networks, good housing, high standard of living, opportunities for valued social roles, and a range of involvement in sport or leisure activities. So again, in class, we'll organise these into the biopsychosocial model, but these are the main protective factors against mental illness and personality disorders. So we're going to go through this in much more detail in class if we haven't already, but these are the 10 types of personality disorders that are the most common. Now, they're categorized, as you can see, into cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. So cluster A features of odd or eccentric thoughts or behaviors. So some examples include paranoid personality disorder, so persuasive distrust and suspiciousness of others and their motives, since early adulthood in a variety of contexts, beliefs regarding being deceived, sees hidden meanings or hidden messages in things that just aren't there, hold very strong grudges, and have high fidelity suspicions of their partner. Now, schizoid personality disorder, so detachment from relationships, very restricted emotional expression, very low engagement in sexual and social relationships, so just no interest whatsoever. And schizotypal personality disorder involves social and interpersonal deficits, being very, very eccentric, very odd beliefs and thinking, and unusual perceptual experiences. Now, I want to make this clear as well at this point that it has to negatively impact the person. So a person may be very unique and very different. It doesn't mean they have a personality disorder. It's if they are negatively affected in terms of their work, their relationships, school, etc., that it would be grounds for diagnosis. Then we have cluster B, which features unstable emotions, dramatic or impulsive behaviours. So antisocial personality disorder definitely fits into cluster B, so fails to conform with social norms, high deceitfulness or lying, very impulsive, very irritable and aggressive, and do not take on responsibility at all, so high irresponsibility. Then we have histrionic personality disorder, so excessive emotionally and attention seeking. Very shallow range of emotions, very, very theatrical, and very, very high in self-dramatization. Then we have borderline personality disorder. So this includes instability of relationships, self-image and emotion, marked impulsivity, identity disturbance, suicidal and self-mutilating behaviors, intense anger, much more than would be seen in the typical range, and transient paranoid thoughts. Also included in cluster B, I know it's cut off there, but I'll read it out to you. So narcissistic personality disorder, so excessive need for admiration, a sense of self-importance, and can be very, very angry and quick to anger with those that they see as inferior to them, very unforgiving and very impulsive individuals as well. Then we have cluster C, so features of anxious or fearful thoughts and behaviors. So avoidant personality disorder is categorized as cluster C. So this is social inhibition, feelings of inadequacy, hypersensitivity to negative evaluation, and avoidance of social situations altogether. We have obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is not the same as obsessive compulsive disorder. That's a different class, a different category of mental health disorder. So this is the personality disorder that is obsessive compulsive. So preoccupation with orderliness, perfectionism, a need for control, and very low flexibility that impacts the individual in a negative way. And then we have dependent personality disorder. So excessive need to be taken care of by others, very, very submissive and clingy, so cannot stand up for themselves and very clingy to others. Very intense fear of separation and needs others to take responsibility even for the most basic or mundane decisions in day-to-day life. So that's a summary of the main or 10 types of personality disorders that are the most commonly diagnosed as part of the DSM-5. So to finish, let's talk about the DSM-5 and what we need to consider going forward when we look at personality disorders in this topic. So obviously we know that diagnosis is based on the criteria from this manual. It was developed based on the behavioral expectations of white middle-class Westerners with a focus on the US. So it is worth really keeping that in mind. Yes, it is the main manual for diagnosis of mental health disorders. However, it is biased, as we can tell, in its development. So it was, again, based on white middle-class Westerners and how they should behave in certain instances. Now, it really needs to be noted here that it doesn't take into account other cultural differences, that even though it may seem bizarre to Westerners, for example, it may be completely customary given the culture of, another country or another group of people. And that's definitely worth mentioning here. So the big issue is those who lie outside this demographic may have different social norms. So misdiagnoses are common in other cultures. So it's worth keeping in mind it is biased towards Western customs and Westernized countries. Now, diagnosis is also comprised of clinical questionnaires and behavioral observations. So it's not just like we look up the definition in this manual and go, okay, yep, there's some evidence there, they've got this disorder. No. We need to go through a rigorous screening process and obviously a lot of clinical questionnaires and behavioral observations, like I talked about in my previous video on personality assessment. Now, the DSM-5, again, can be problematic in terms of personality disorder diagnosis, as patients may change how they act or withhold information, again, leading to a lack of an accurate diagnosis. So it is actually notoriously difficult to accurately diagnose a personality disorder because it's so subjective and it's so grey in the whole area of this field of psychology anyway. So sometimes it is accurately diagnosed and sometimes it's not. And it also depends, again, on the cultural norms or what that person is used to given where they grew up culturally. So worth keeping that in mind going forward. Okay, everyone, that sums up this revision video on personality disorders. If you have any questions, you know what to do. Let me know.